morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in your day and your walk of life. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to another episode of Pugilism Company Podcast. I am your host, Mr. Reed, aka The Black Bert Sugar. Said it last week, won't rehash it, so let's get right into the Showtime triple header. Enough about me. Had a real good card. Real entertaining night of fights. The weather in Dallas wasn't so good, so what better thing to do than sit at home and watch boxing? Card kicked off with Julian J. Rock Williams against Nate the Great Gallimore. It was an IBF eliminator at 154 pounds. J. Rock, it was his first major step back up since getting KO'd by Jermell Charlo last year sometime, or maybe even late 2016 if I'm not mistaken. Look, J-Rock's a good solid fighter. He's a Philly fighter, so he's got cojones to spare. Ain't no punk in him. He's a solid contender, but I see him more as a gatekeeper type. He doesn't really have the power to be an elite fighter at 54, and just being blunt, he has too much Philly in him. He stays in the pocket a little too long, which is exactly what got him KO'd against Charlo in his last major fight. Anyway, he won a majority 12-round decision, and things are looking up for him. On an aside, another thing I don't really cut for about him, just personal preference. I don't like the Abe Lincoln style beard. You know, maybe I'm nitpicking. I'm sure that grown man don't care about my opinions of his facial hair. But the Abe Lincoln, the LeBron James, the freeway fro beard, especially with no stash, like, come on, bruh. Come on, who you trying to emancipate, man? Just grow your facial hair out. Our second fight was a rematch of the upset of the year in 2017. It was Caleb Truax against James DeGale 2 for the IBF 168-pound title. My man, Mr. Truax from Minnesota, he came out to Prince, which was a personal first for me. I'm a Prince fan, love the dude. God bless him, rest his soul. But for your ring walk, there's a time and place for Prince, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that walking to the ring to try to intentionally hurt somebody else is that place. I don't know, it'd be like coming out to Boy George and Culture Club to Do You Really Want to Hurt Me or something along those lines. I think he came out to When Doves Cry. Great song, but again, a shaky ring walk choice. The fight itself was ugly. There were headbutts aplenty, point deductions. Both dudes was cut along both sides of their eyes. There was blood everywhere. Ringside looked like a damn crime scene. And at the end, DeGale got his belt back. He said he was embarrassed by losing, so he redeemed himself. The right guy did win the fight. Again, as I noted, it was sloppy. If they do a third one, it would be a decent filler for like deep on someone's undercard. Other than that, I don't know that we really need to even revisit these two for a third time. It's not exactly Ali Frazier 3 or Barrera Morales 3 or any other good trilogy, Gotti Ward 3 that you could recollect. Then we had the main event. Mr. Jarrett Swift Hurd against Erislandi Lara, unifying the WBA and IBF titles at 154. Hurd, man. Huge junior middleweight. Right here, right now, I'm calling BS on Showtime because they had this brother listed at 5'11", 163, and they had Lara listed at 5'9", 162. If you saw those two staring at each other during the ref's instructions preceding the opening bell, there's no way those stats were accurate. Mr. Hurd was a good 3-4 inches taller, had to be at least 20 pounds heavier. His head was bigger, his back was wider, His arms were thicker. His calves were thicker. He was the bigger man. Let's not mask it. Hurd doesn't mask it. He fights like he's the bigger man. He doesn't hide his one clear advantage, and he fights to that advantage. He's going to wear you down. He's going to bear down on you. And oh, by the way, so far he's shown an excellent chin. I haven't seen him hurt in the handful of fights of his that I've been privy to. And when you have a big old dude, a big ass junior middleweight, walking you down the entire fight and you can't hurt him, that's some mental fatigue for your ass. Lara started smooth, man. Hey, them southpaw 1-2s, jab, left cross, jab, left cross. He couldn't miss Hurd with him. And my man Paulie Malignaggi brought up a good point. He said sometimes with Hurd, it's so easy to hit him that it makes otherwise more movement-oriented fighters, it makes them stand more still, more stationary. They're in the pocket more than they would normally like to be, but they become intoxicated with the ease by which that they're connecting with this dude. Now, I don't know if that was the case with Lara, but he was a lot more flat-footed than we've ever seen. Could also be age. I mean, literally, Erislandy Lara will turn 35 tomorrow, April 11th. He'll be 35 years old. Mr. Lara is also a Latin American athlete. And let's just put it out there, especially in baseball and boxing, a lot of the ages of our Latin American athletes, they've been made to appear to be younger than they actually are. So, by the date given, Lara turns 35 tomorrow, but man, that dude liable to be 46 years old tomorrow. Now, I'm exaggerating, but at the same time, you never know. Anyway, that was another factor, or could have been. Perhaps Lara doesn't have the wheels at his increased age to stick and move the way he probably could have and should have if he wanted to win. But back to Hurd. He won't be 28 till September this year. His size, man, he's got like a George Foreman-esque size advantage. And he uses it similarly to Big George. No, he doesn't punch anywhere near as hard as Big George. No, his jab isn't remotely as good as George's jab. But I just see slight similarities just in the physicality. Whenever Lara would try to hold, Hurd would literally just shrug him off with his shoulders. He wouldn't even extend his arms because he didn't need to. Like, dude, get your little self up off me, dude. He big brothered him, if you will. The size wore on Lara. The fight was very reminiscent of Hurd's fight with Austin Trout, which is what they hoped. That's what Team Hurd hoped. By the middle rounds, just as was the case with Trout, Lara looked like a dude. He looked like a vehicle that didn't have enough gas in the tank to quite reach its desired destination. Now, Lara showed heart. For all the flack he gets about having a boring style and he's always on his bicycle, he showed nuts and guts this fight. So he should be praised and applauded. But man, it wore on him. And going into the last round, I felt it was anybody's fight. And so did the judges, because Hurd dropped Lara. Actually, it was a soft touching right uppercut that lifted Lara's head, and then bow! The left hook dropped him. That knockdown ended up being the difference, as all three scorecards were 114-113. One judge had Lara by that score. The other two had Mr. Hurd by that score. So literally that knockdown not only got Hurd the split decision, but it also made him the unified WBA and now IBF 154-pound champion. The future's bright for him too. I mean, he's got the Odell Beckham styled hair. From what I'm told, that hairstyle is hot on them streets these days. I said hot on them streets. I don't have no hair, that's how I roll. But he's got the look. Got some muscle to him. He's a fairly well-spoken brother. Both parents in his picture. His needle was pointing upwards. And more importantly, he's fan-friendly. He's the type of guy, when people see him fight once, they're going to stay till they're going to want to follow up. They're going to get on Google to see when he fights again. His next move, he could do anything. He's already spoken of moving up to middleweight by the middle of 2019. He wants to reign supreme at 54 first. This fight with Lara was good enough to warrant rematch consideration. Still early in the year, but I would list this one for now, Lara and Hurd, as being a fight of the year candidate. So they could easily do it again. But I'm thinking the fact that Lara has this reputation for not being in exciting fights, I'm almost expecting that to be held against him. With those high-risk, low-reward fighters as such, whenever they lose, they usually make them start from scratch and rebuild again. So Lara, to remain in the mix, is probably going to have to take the harder road. I think the natural next step for Mr. Hurd is Jermell Charlo. Now, Charlo won't be fighting until June on the undercard of Abner Maris and Leo Santa Cruz 2. But after that, let's do it. It's ironic. They all fought on the same card, which was prior to this one. And after the fight, Hurd said he wanted to fight Lara next. Lara said he wanted to fight Charlo next. And Charlo said he wanted to fight Hurd next. Well, what we ended up getting, obviously, was Hurd and Lara. I think the natural next fight would be Mr. Hurd and Mr. Charlo. Two younger guys. They're going to talk plenty of shit in the build-up. They both have those looks, those crossover looks. And they're both going to stand there and fight. Charlo was on record already saying, I don't think this man can stand in front of me like he stood in front of Lara and beat me. Since getting with Derrick James, Charlo's got nothing but knockouts. He's also a naturally bigger man than Erislandy Lara. So it stands to reason that, hey, maybe Mr. Hurd doesn't need to stand in front of him. I'll say this, though. Here's the line of demarcation with Hurd. It's the 5th, 6th round. If you haven't tamed him in some way by the 5th or 6th, that back half of that fight is going to be rough for you. Same will apply to Charlo. If he didn't get him out of there, if he hadn't earned Hurd's respect with his shots by then, rut row. Moving on, there's been some Errol, Spence, and Kell Brook talk. Well, Mr. Brook happened to be in Vegas for this fight at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. He was in support of his countryman, James DeGale. They're both from Great Britain. There was a video, Spence and Brook, they kept it respectful, but they met up. Brook just had a comeback KO not too long ago, so he's obviously feeling good about himself. And he mentioned Spence giving him a rematch. On top of that, doing the rematch once again in Sheffield, England. Now, the man just beat you on your home turf. I don't see Spence minding that rematch at all, but as he says, how about getting a belt first? You have to make this an attractive and viable option for Spence. Right now, he's trying to clean up and unify at 47. Go to 54 at a weight you're more comfortable with, Kell, just to give you a rematch. I think this is a possible scenario, but here's how it needs to play out. On May 12th, we have Saddam Ali fighting Liam Smith for the WBO title at 154. If Smith beats Ali, which is likely, then Kell Brook versus Liam Smith is an easy fight to sell in the UK. Each man would make high 6 figures fighting that fight for the WBO title in the UK. If Brook wins that, then hey, get that belt and you'll have the opportunity. You'll get to see how hungry how hungry Mr. Spence is. If he can take your chocolate brownies, those chocolate brownies, mate. But get that belt first. Get that belt first, Kell. Get that belt. I'm sure EJ will jump all over it. Just make it more attractive for him. That's all I'm saying. Last little bit of news. The card itself, the promoter of a record, was Mayweather Promotions of the triple header. You know, Al Heyman manages the fighters. He's not an actual promoter. So for each show he does on Showtime, there's a promoter of record. Sometimes it's Lou DiBella. Sometimes it's Richard Schaefer. In this particular instance, it was Floyd, who was at the fight in attendance. He announced that he was speaking with Todd DeBuff. Todd DeBuff with Top Rank. And Floyd said it's very likely that after Tank Davis's upcoming fight on April 21st and Vasil Lomachenko's next fight, which will be against Jorge Linares, Floyd is saying it's looking pretty good that Lomachenko and Gervonta Tank Davis will meet up. Now, if you've heard, there's been some friction with Mayweather Promotions and Tank. Tank's been going at it with everybody lately on Twitter and all other means of social media. He's been going at it with everybody. He's been kind of insinuating how he wasn't quite ready for the first world title that he got. Floyd just threw him in there. And he may not quite be ready for this next one. But he said, I won the first one on my own. And he was emphasizing on his own. And I'll win the second one on my own. So there's friction there. And because of that friction, I'm wondering if Floyd is cashing Tank out. Could Tank beat Lomachenko? Yes. But I think he would need a year or two of seasoning. If you do that this year, it almost looks like a cash out situation. Why would Floyd cash Tank out? Well, beyond the clapping Tank is doing on social media, if you remember, Tank lost his belt on the scales. Here he was on the second largest pay-per-view card in history, in combative sports history, Mayweather versus McGregor. You're on the undercard in the co-feature, in the co-main event. It's supposed to be a title fight. You lose it on the scales. Say what you will about Floyd Mayweather, he's always been disciplined. He's always taken his preparation for fights very seriously. So I'm sure he was instantly disenchanted with Tank Davis just for missing weight, especially a young dude. You're like 22 and you're missing weight, bruh. I'm sure that turned Floyd off. So you couple that with the fact their relationship is deteriorating, and that's why it's looking like this could be a cash out. Like, okay, you lose, get away from me, live happily ever after. Believe it or not, Floyd's also still flirting with the UFC. He's even insinuating he could fight in the octagon. He mentioned the name Conor McGregor, who, as I'm sure you've heard, got into a little trouble with the NYPD for doing damage to a bus, which caused a couple postponements of the latest UFC pay-per-view. Fighters on the bus were cut by glass from objects thrown at the bus by Conor McGregor and his team. Anyway, I don't see any chance of Floyd fighting McGregor in the octagon. That just wouldn't end well. And Floyd is not the type of dude to put himself in a situation where he not only could get embarrassed, but more than likely would get embarrassed. I've heard rumors, though. Oh, there is one. CM Punk, former WWE wrestler, came to UFC a year or two ago. Worst fighter I've seen ever in an octagon. CM Punk was a professional wrestler, WWE, did great promos. But the fact of the matter is, he brought no specialty in any aspect of martial arts or fighting into the octagon. No collegiate wrestling background. No boxing background. No Muay Thai background. No Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. Hell, not even a heavy street fighting background, which at least Kimbo Slice had. CM Punk didn't even have that. What he saw was Brock Lesnar go to the UFC and make a name for himself, so he wanted to try it. And in the one fight he had, he got embarrassed. First round stoppage in a fight where he failed to land a single strike. Strike being a punch, a kick, an elbow. All my man did was catch blows for the duration of the minute and a half, 2 minutes his fight lasted. That would be a viable UFC fight for Floyd, but still, ultimately, I don't see where this helps his career. And with the way UFC's looking of late, I don't see that they have the money to truly make this worthwhile for Floyd. Well, y'all, that's about all I got for now. Wanted to give you an update, give you my thoughts on that Showtime triple header. Good night of viewing. Thank you to those of y'all who checked out the last one. Hope you check out this one. Please, please hit that bell for notifications. Please continue to look at the site itself, pugilismco.com. That's PUGILISMCO.com. Pugilism Podcast, y'all. We out.